This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang.
Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game finds me joined by Fred, Justin, and new to the channel, Tim. I've decided to play my brand new Commodore Guff Super Friends deck, keeping Forge of Heroes, Hollowed Fountain, Comet, Stellar Pup, Island, Kakar Wind's Fury, Land Tax, and Depopulate. Fred has brought out an old commander who I've only seen I think once before with Mannichi, and he's keeping Chaos Warp, Expedition Map, Baloth, Baratil Entertainer, Slagworm Armor, War Room, Hall of the Bandit Lord, and a Mountain. Justin is playing Grismold, which I'm very excited to see, keeping a Forest, a Swamp, Golgari Signet, Swiftfoot Boots, Rampant Growth, Mycoloth, and a Clackbridge Troll. Tim is the self-proclaimed master of Mardu, and he's playing Queen Marchesa, Long May She Reign. He keeps Luxury Suite, Temple of Silence, Temple of Malice, Mountain, Boros Signet, Soul Ring, and a Weathered Wayfarer. Fred wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Mountain, and then casts Expedition Map. I play a Hollowed Fountain, taking 2 so I can play a Land Tax, and pass to Justin. Justin draws and plays a Forest. Tim's got his Luxury Suite, which comes in untapped, and he pays 1 for a Soul Ring and passes. Fred draws and plays a tapped Hall of the Bandit Lord. He then pays 1 for Slagworm Armor, passing. I get a Lone Mountain on my upkeep from the Land Tax trigger, and then draw. I then play the Mountain, and pass. Justin draws and plays a Swamp, and then pays 2 for Farseek to find another Swamp, and passes. Tim plays a tapped Temple of Silence, scrying 1 to the top, and then plays a Boros Signet. He follows up with a Weathered Wayfarer, and passes to Fred. Fred just plays a Mountain. I go and find a Plains from the Land Tax trigger, and draw. I then play a tapped Celestial Colonnade as my land for turn, and pass to Justin. Justin plays a Verdant Catacombs, cracking it to find a Bayou, and Fred sacrifices his Expedition Map in the meantime, going to find a Myriad Landscape. Justin then casts a Golgari Signet, and then a Swiftfoot Boots, and passes. Tim draws and plays a Mountain. He then casts Queen Marchesa, becoming the monarch as she enters. He then passes, drawing during his end step. Fred draws and plays a Mountain. He casts Dockside Extortionist, and as it enters, it makes him 5 treasure tokens. He then cracks them all to cast Baloth Baratil, and he passes after that. I draw and play a Plains. I pay 1 blue for a Mystic Remora, which is kinda late, but what can we do, and pass to Justin. Justin draws and plays a Forest. He casts Death Sprout and targets Baloth, and then gets a Forest off of it as the creature's destroyed. He then follows up by casting a Rampant Growth, going to find a Swamp, and passes after he's found his land. Tim draws and plays a Plains. He casts Assemble the Legion, and then once that's out, activates the Weathered Wayfarer, going into his library to put a Reliquary Tower to hand. After that, he moves to his end step, drawing from being the Monarch. Fred draws and plays a War Room. He then activates it, losing 1, and draws a card. I let the Remora go on my upkeep, and draw. I play an Island, and then cast Oath of Lieges, passing after that. Justin draws and plays Grismold, and then moves to his end step, making everyone a plant token, and then passing to Tim. Tim gets to find a Swamp from the Oath trigger, and then makes a Soldier token from Assemble the Legion, and then draws. He plays a tapped Temple of Malice, scrying 1, and bottoming it. He then plays a Vampire Nighthawk. Tim then draws from being the Monarch, and passes turn. Fred gets to find a Mountain from his Oath trigger, and then draws her turn. He plays a Valakut, which comes in tapped, and then plays a Quarter Shield. He then casts an Imperial Recruiter, which goes into his library and grabs him an Ogre Menial. He follows up by playing Mannichi, but doesn't attack, and passes. I get to find a mountain for my oath, and then draw. I then play a Glacial Fortress, and cast Kakar before passing turn. Justin draws and plays a Clackbridge Troll, giving the goat tokens to me. He follows up with a Virulent Plague, which as it enters, wipes out all the tokens that he's donated, and pumps Grismold up to an 11/11. Going to combat, no one sacrifices a creature to the troll, and Justin swings the troll at Tim, and Grismold at me. I block some of the damage at least with Kakar, and Tim blocks with the Vampire Nighthawk to trade, but still takes 3 from the trample damage. Justin then gains the Monarchy. He then moves to his end step, and draws from it at the end of turn, making some plant tokens for each of his opponents, who all immediately die, and adds more counters to Grismold. Tim then activates Weathered Wayfarer to go and find Maze of Ith during the end step, and moves to his turn. Tim adds a counter to the Assembled Legion, making 2 soldier tokens and an assassin token, which immediately die to the Virulent Plague, and once more Grismold gets bigger. He then finds a mountain from the Oath of Allegiance trigger. He draws for turn, and then plays a Maze of Ith. Once that's done, he plays an Orzhov Advocist. He follows up with a Mirage Mirror, and goes to combat. He swings Queen Marchesa at Justin, and after she connects, Tim regains the Monarchy, and then moves to his end step, drawing from it. Fred gets a mountain from the Oath trigger, and draws. He plays Myriad Landscape, which comes in tapped, and then taps the Hall of the Bandit Lord and loses 3 life to help cast an Ogre Menial. He then moves a Slagwort Honor to it, but passes even though it has haste. I get an island from the Oath trigger, and draw. I play a Clifftop Retreat, and then cast Commodore Guff, and then play Rowan's Talent on him. I then downtick him to copy the ability, drawing 2 and dealing 2 to each opponent, and once that's done, I pass to Justin. Justin draws and plays a Swamp. He then puts the Swiftfoot Boots to Grismold, and plays Sylvan Offering, putting 7 into the X. He chooses me to get the Treefolk and the Elves, but the Elves immediately die, and Grismold gets 14 more counters. Going to combat, Justin makes a non-aggression pact with Fred, and swings Grismold at Tim. Tim responds by playing Rakdos Charm, and then activates the Maze of Ith, and prevents the lethal swing. With that, Justin moves to his end step, making a plant token for everyone that immediately dies, and adds even more counters to his commander. Tim finds a Plains from the Oath, and makes his token, which instantly dies, and then draws for turn. He then plays a Reliquary Tower, and draws from being the Monarch at the end of turn, and passes to Fred. Fred gets a mountain from the Oath, which as it enters, deals 3 damage to Queen Marchesa with the Valakut trigger, and he then draws for turn. He then moves over the Accorder's Shield onto the Ogre Menial, but still doesn't attack, and passes. I get to find a Plains from my Oath trigger, and then draw. I play a Sea of Clouds, and then cast Soul Ring, and then cast Deploy the Gatewatch, hitting Sarkhan the Masterless as my only Planeswalker. I then follow up by casting Comet. I activate Comet and roll a 4, dealing 5 to Justin, and down-ticking Comet by 2 loyalty. I then uptick Sarkhan to go to combat, and I swing Guff at Justin for 4, which is actually commander damage which I don't realize. I then move to my end step, and put a loyalty counter from Guff onto Comet, and pass. Justin gets a Forest from the Oath, and draws. He plays a Phyrexian Tower, and then casts Michaeloth, devouring the Treefolk to put 2+1/+1 counters onto it. This has Grismold also getting pumped, and Justin then goes to combat. He swings the gigantic Grismold at Fred, but Fred is ready with Chaos Warp to save himself. The Chaos Warp has Justin shuffling and then reeling off the top a Forest, which he puts into play. In his second main phase, he then recasts Grismold, and then during his end step, makes more plant tokens, which all die and make Grismold even bigger. Tim gets a mountain from the Oath and makes some soldier tokens that die, and puts 2 counters on the Advocist, and Fred and Justin also take the deal as well, putting the counters onto Mannichi and the Michaeloth respectively. Tim then draws for turn. He plays a Swamp and casts Cunning Rhetoric. And Fred cracks his Myriad Landscape in response, finding 2 mountains and dealing 6 damage to Justin with the Valaka triggers. Tim then plays a Court of Ire and becomes the Monarch again, and draws from being the Monarch at the end of turn as he passes. Fred gets to find a mountain from the Oath trigger, and as it comes in, uses the Valakut trigger to take out Commodore Guff. He then plays Subira and activates it 3 times to make the Ogre Menial, the Dockside Extortionist, and the Imperial Recruiter unblockable. He then moves to combat and swings the Recruiter and Dockside at me and the Menial at Justin. Before leaving blocks though, he pays 1 to activate the Menial's Fire Breathing, and then activates Mannichi to swap everyone's power and toughness. This has Justin taking 13 Infect to take him out, and I take 3 from the other creatures. After that, Fred plays a Mind Stone and passes. I draw and play Forge of Heroes, and then recast Commodore Guff, and then enchant him with Teferi's Talent. I then play Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, and downtick Commodore Guff to draw 4 and deal 4 to each opponent, which also gets him 4 loyalty counters as I draw 4 cards thanks to the talent. I then uptick Sarkhan and go to combat, swinging Sarkhan and common at Fred for 8 as dragons. After that, I move to my end step, putting a loyalty counter onto Chandra from Guff, and pass turn. Tim's upkeep has him making 5 soldier tokens from Assemble, and puts 2 more counters onto his Advocist, and Fred does the same with Mannichi. He also then deals 7 to Sarkhan thanks to the Court of Ire trigger because he's the Monarch, and draws. Tim then replays Queen Marchesa, still being the Monarch, and passes through his phases, drawing at the end of turn. Fred gets a mountain from the Oath trigger, which deals 3 and finishes off Sarkhan, and then draws for turn. He then makes the Ogre and the Imperial Recruiter unblockable with Subira, and swings them at me. Fred repeats the tricks from last time to make the Ogre deal lethal infect damage to me, and after that, Fred then activates his War Room, drawing a card, and then cracks the Mind Stone to draw a card again, and passes to Tim. Tim makes 6 more soldier tokens thanks to the Assemble, deals 7 to Fred's face thanks to the Court, and puts 2 more +1/+1 counters onto his Advocist, and then draws for his turn. He plays an Isolated Chapel, and then casts Karmic Justice. Going to combat, Tim swings all of his soldiers at Fred. He blocks 5 of them, taking them out after he pumps the Ogre, but still takes 6. In his post-combat main phase, Tim then plays Necropotence and puts 11 life into it. Moving to his end step, his 11 Necropotence cards go to hand, plus he gets to draw an extra card from being the Monarch, and passes to Fred. Fred draws and plays a Swiftfoot Boots, and then equips it onto his Ogre. He then makes it unblockable thanks to Subira, and pumps it once more, and then swaps his power and toughness to swing at Tim. Tim is ready though, casting Ink Shield to fog the combat damage, not to mention make a ton of Inkling tokens. Knowing that he's facing lethal backswing, plus 7 damage from the Court of Ire plus 7 damage from the Court of Ire trigger on Tim's upkeep, Fred knows when he's beat and scoops it up. Game review time. This game was 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 31 seconds. I thought it was really fun, and I enjoyed my time playing it, despite the fact that I'm not entirely sure I really enjoy Commodore Guff. I built the deck thinking that I could just throw in a bunch of Jeskai Planeswalkers and go to town, and the reality of it is I think there's probably more to it than that. I've only got 17 in the deck, which probably isn't enough, even if they're very good. I was thrilled with the performance from Justin and his Grismold deck. That Virulent Outburst was just brutal for tokens, and considering he was giving so many out like candy, Grismold just got massive. I think it took the combined efforts of both Fred and Tim to take care of him, because frankly I wasn't doing anything, so it was kind of cool to see how hard it was to stop that big old troll. Considering this is my second time seeing Mannichi, the last time being with Nick, it was really fun to see. I like the idea of having a commander that swaps power and toughness, and it actually leads to some really interesting cards. I've told Fred this before, but I really enjoy his deck building style as he tends to pick non-traditional ways, and it's really fun and surprising to see in action. Losing to the Ogre Menial because it has Infect, although it has 0 power, is just a lot of fun. I think Tim did a pretty great job of staying under the radar, especially once that Infect creature hit the board. Of course, when that kind of stuff hits the field when it's unblockable, all eyes shift to that opponent, and Tim was able to win with an Ink Shield, which I like to think would have made Sheldon smile.
This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.